Today I'm speaking with Fifth. Fifth, thank you so much for joining me today.
Hey, appreciate you for having me, Tim.
We've been trying to do this for a while, so I really appreciate you making time today for my questions and my chance to just hear your story. I know you have quite an interesting journey that you're going to share with us. And just to give everyone a quick bio, and then I want to hear a little bit more from you about who you are. But I know you're a rapper from the San Francisco Bay Area in California. You're the fourth child of five, three older sisters and one younger brother. Baptized at the age of 9 in the Jehovah's Witnesses, what I would call a cult, the Jehovah's Witnesses religion. And as a teenager, he was very active at witnessing. He was a Bethelite, a pioneer, a ministerial student, servant. He been giving public talks in a Spanish-speaking congregation, and very active. And eventually, something happened, and we're going to talk about that. What happened that changed your course? But before we get into the details of that, of the serious part of the story, can you tell us something more about yourself and your hobbies?
So my hobbies, this is probably not a big surprise, but one is listening to music. I'm a big fan of music, obviously, and that's part of what influenced me to do what I'm doing now. Um, I've been taking technical analysis classes, so that's been an interesting thing, actually, with someone from Atlanta, believe it or not. So I'm trying to, educate myself on those types of things that we didn't learn in school that I think we probably should have. So
You're referring
yeah,
to
those are
trading,
probably
like charting and trading for stocks for currency.
exactly. Learning the candlesticks and understanding the history behind them and how they affect money and our world around us. Things like that. Things that I would like to teach my son at an early age so he can have a head start. Out here.
Yeah, that's awesome. That's what the harmonic part of my title is, Harmonic Atheist. Harmonic refers to harmonic trading patterns. So I study the
Oh,
same
okay.
thing. That's awesome.
Oh, nice. All right.
Yeah,
Very cool.
we'll have to trade some of our what we get educated on there separately, and help each other get better at trading.
Absolutely. That would be great.
Very cool. Well, is there anything else you want to tell us about your hobbies or any other interests, things that you do with your time?
Yeah, especially right now, watching the playoffs, the NBA playoffs, really big into basketball, really big into football. Watching was never the best at playing either sport, but I always, been an avid spectator, I would say. And then just playing with my son, um, you know, yeah, just normal things, I guess.
How old is he?
My son is 3.5.
Nice. Very nice.
Yeah.
So you're out of that stage where they're not letting you sleep, but now they're learning, they're able to talk back and say no.
Exactly. Sometimes he doesn't let me sleep because he wants to tell something. He wants to tell me something. So it's just, say a similar result, but maybe different reason now.
Yeah, no, I know it. It's a beautiful part of life, but it's very hard some days. But they definitely make life worth living, and it's a beautiful thing to raise kids.
Absolutely.
So, well, I know we're here for the main part of our visit here is just to hear your story. So I like to invite people to just take us back from your earliest days. What beliefs and ideas shaped your worldview as you were a kid and growing up?
Yeah, so I was born into a family of Jehovah's Witnesses, and as you mentioned, I'm the fourth of five children. Well, even before that, I guess my both of my parents were Jehovah's Witnesses before they even got married and had children. My mother became a baptized Jehovah's Witness when she was 7, and my father when he was 17. So, by the time they got married in their early 20s, more or less, they were already full on Jehovah's Witnesses. So, um, basically, I grew up in that. My parents adhered to everything very strictly, basically the way that it's prescribed by the leaders. I think they were like very exemplary, or they are very exemplary Jehovah's Witnesses in that context. Um,
They're still in it.
we, yes, they are definitely still in it. Um, I have members of my immediate family. Some of us learned other languages. For example, I learned Spanish and Portuguese, for the purpose of promoting the message of that organization or cult. And I have other family that have like gone to live in other countries to kind of continue to try to expand the message. And my father is an elder in the congregation, which is the highest level locally that you can reach. There's only maybe about 5 out of the 100 congregants that are elders. So my father holds that position. So our family was always considered like a super Jehovah's Witness family, right? And
Mm.
so So yeah, so that's what I grew up in. When I turned 19, I got the very prestigious honor, if you look at it in the context of how they think, of going being accepted to the headquarters. So I was at the headquarters of Jehovah's Witnesses, which is a very small percentage of members of that organization ever get that chance or that opportunity. So
Is that the
that
Bethelite part of it?
exactly, yes. So that's
Okay.
what they refer to as being a Bethelite. When you're at the headquarters, they call it Bethel, right? So,
Mhm.
so
Where
yeah,
is
I
that,
was.
by the way?
That's located in New York.
Okay. Do
So
people like from all over the world go there?
So it's primarily there are branches in every country. Well, not in every country, but in a lot of countries. A lot of countries have their own branches. Some branches cover like several different countries and things like that. But the main worldwide branch is in the U.S. So for the most part, when other people in other countries want to go to the headquarters, they end up going to their local branch, in their country or in a
Gotcha.
neighboring country. So for the most part, the headquarters here is mainly people that are from the U.S. There are some exceptions, maybe some people with certain specialize in certain things. They'll bring them from other parts of the world, but for the most part, it's people here from the U.S.
Gotcha. And pardon all my questions. It's some of it I understand, but some of it is definitely new to me and foreign to me. But is it set up though where the New York Bethel is like the main headquarters for the whole world?
Exactly. And so the leaders of the cult who are called the governing body, which is made up of, you know, let's say 8 to 18 men over the years, right? I think right now the number is 9 or 10.
Okay.
Um, and they oversee the entire work around the entire world, right? So they because this is the world headquarters, they're located there in New York as well. And so you have like not just them, but a lot of the prominent figures in the organization are located there at the Bethel here in the United States in New York.
Gotcha. Do you mind if I throw a few more questions at you just for about the what JWs believe?
Yeah, absolutely,
So,
absolutely.
so
Mm-hmm.
with those men, um, what kind of power are we talking about? Like with, I know it doesn't make me surprised to hear that it's all men. Of course, most of these cults are all men at the top, but what what are they doing? What are they deciding? And like, what kind of power do they have? And are some of them ever disqualified because of certain things that they do? Like, how do you get there and stay there? And what do you do in that office?
Yeah, so let me see. I think the best way to explain that. So as far as power, they have enormous power and influence in the lives of the congregants. I mean, basically whatever they say is to be considered as if it's coming from Jesus and or God directly. The idea is they are inspired, that God inspires and communicates messages to them in some way, or guides them or prods them, whatever, some semantics at that point, but they use these terms to refer to they're being given some sort of divine direction. So when they refer to, like, when they say things like you need to listen to the voice of God or you need to obey God, they're really referring to the things that they are saying, right? Because God doesn't speak to you really directly, he does have a special relationship with us. So if you want his favor, you have to do it the way that we say. And the interesting thing about that, amongst other things, is that um, those whatever it is that they're saying changes over time as far as what you're supposed to be doing, as far as what you're supposed to believe on specific things. They'll say something like, well, we've been given, there's an expression called new light. And what that means is, we used to believe this, but now the light has gotten brighter, right? And God has clarified this to us. So now, before when we said, you're not supposed to get a blood transfusion, but you can get fractions. Well, now we've gotten clarification that no, you can't get blood fractions, even in a blood transfusion, or vice versa, or whatever. So there's just things that just change over time. And as those things change over time, you are supposed to be in lockstep with it and not
Hmm.
question it, and just understand that God in his due time, he makes clear what he wants to make clear. And if it's something that was, they won't even use the word wrong, but let's just, yeah, if it was something that was wrong, it's just because God allowed it. And, so it's
Mm.
just kind of one of those many fallacies that we see in these types of groups.
It's amazing too, just that verse pops into mind that God is not the author of confusion. It's like it's so
Right.
confusing. And I know Catholics do it a lot too with, the Vatican II, and just, it's like God is looking at us all, and it's like he's saying you're too thick and stupid to get it. So I'm going to let
Right.
you kind of mess yourselves up for a while with my little bit of knowledge, and then I'll share a little bit more as you get smarter. And it's like, come on, this doesn't sound right. This sounds so human, so stupid. But when you were looking at that, did you ever see cases where the men in leadership disagreed, and like how would they deal with that if one person said, I don't know, like I want all the men to wear ties to, to church from now on, and then someone else was like, no, I don't hear God saying that. Like, how would they resolve disputes?
So first of all, you as a non-governing body member in the organization, you for the most part will never hear about any of those,
Okay,
right? They have these private closed door meetings. So even the people that are on the floor down the hall from them who are, kind of brought into their confidence to a degree, they don't even know when those types of conversations happen or any conversations happen between these members.
right.
And so the only glimpse that I think that we have gotten into what those meetings and those conversations look like is that there was a governing body member that defected, and and then he wrote a book because of how he was treated. He basically, he was excommunicated um, from the religion as a whole, and because they because they kind of didn't allow him to kind of just go away quietly, and by excommunicating him, they made it to where everybody, all Jehovah's Witnesses, will stop talking to him. So this is a guy who came into this religion as a young man. He's like 70 years old, so you've taken away everybody in his life and all of the relationships that he's built. So he's like, okay, I'm gonna go ahead, right? Like, if that's what we're doing. And
Yeah.
so, that may have been an oversimplification, but that's generally, how it was explained. So he wrote a book, and now you understand, like, hey, like, do you really think we should be, telling the brothers, the members, that like, all should we really be being so restrictive? Yeah, we should be being so restrictive, because if not, they're just going to think they can do whatever they want. And so that's what really kind of gave everybody a glimpse into what those meetings look like. Outside of that, you're never going to hear about what goes on there. You don't even hear about what goes on one level above you. And there are so many levels. That's the very top.
Hmm.
So if like you're just a regular member of the congregation, you don't even hear what goes on with the local elders in your congregation, let alone their superiors and their superiors and their superiors and their superiors. It's kind of, everything is kind of a need to know thing,
Yeah.
right? And so whatever levels are below you, there are certain things you just are not supposed to ever divulge.
Hmm. Now you mentioned some of the rules and so forth. What is the culture in a JW church like? Are they ultra conservative? Are you allowed to play cards and go to movies? Like what's the actual day-to-day life like?
Yeah, so what is day-to-day life as a job? So the way that they want you to do it, and the way that they tell you to do it, is basically um they want you to be reading their literature all the time, right? They come out with these magazines frequently, and these books and these videos and blah blah blah, and you're supposed to be caught up on all of it. And if you're not caught up on all of that, you're looked at as spiritually weak, basically, right? And that's kind of the term that they use. You're supposed to evangelize. It's an unofficial average and standard for the whole organization is about 10 hours a month, right? You're supposed to spend just, of your own, paying your own gas, all of this kind of stuff, just out evangelizing. And then there's a tier that I got to, and actually every other member in my family and a lot of other people got to, where you sign up to do 70 hours a month, which is about 17 and a half hours per week, right? So that's in addition to having a job and all of this other stuff. The idea is whatever your circumstances allow you to do, you should be doing that, right? So if you're if it looks like you're able to move to another country, if it looks like you're able to learn another language, if it looks like you're able to devote the 70 instead of the average of 10, you should be doing that. And if you're not doing that, God is actually not even pleased with your service. because you have the circumstances to give more of yourself and you're not doing that. So that it's constantly, it doesn't matter what level you are. I was at the headquarters and you're still kind of hearing that. Like, yeah, you're here, but could you do this? Like you have the circumstance, you could actually do this. And it's like you always feel like I'm not sacrificing enough, I'm not good enough, all these
Mm.
kinds of things. In
What
answer to your, I'm sorry, go ahead.
what is when you say the witnessing and so forth? What are you actually doing? Like the 10 hours or the 70 hours? What are you physically doing? I know you're going door to
Yeah.
door, but what are you saying to people?
Yeah, so yeah, you're going door to door, you're standing at those carts that you see maybe around airports or public transportation stations or whatever. And so what you're saying, oh man, it's like triggering even to remember my my pitch. But I'll do it just for you, just for you, I'll do
Thank you.
it.
I appreciate it.
If I can
You
remember
got to
it.
get me saved, man. Get me saved.
Yeah. So if you knock on someone's door, you know, hey, good morning. You say something kind of non-threatening, like, oh, we're Bible students and we're encouraging people to read their Bible. Have you ever thought about why there's sickness, or have you ever thought about blah blah, right? And so you're trained, you go with a planned presentation, you're trained on conversation stoppers. It's kind of like a sales training where you understand if somebody says, oh, I'm Muslim. It's like, oh, it's interesting about the Muslim, blah blah blah. And then you kind of you try to find a way to get oh, I already worship Jesus. Oh, that's great, blah blah blah. And then you just whatever it is, there's very few answers that have any finality from your standpoint. You're always looking to overcome these objections. And then the goal is to set it up to where you can make what they call a return visit, which is pretty self-explanatory. You're just trying to go back and continue to cultivate. And the ultimate goal is to make people become Jehovah's Witnesses. Because the belief of Jehovah's Witnesses is it does not matter if you say you are a Satan worshiper, Muslim, you're a member of the Jewish faith, you're an atheist, you're either Jehovah's Witness or you're not. So you guys are all in the same, you guys are all gonna die like exact same way. There's no like, well, at least you kind of believe in me. No, there's none of that. You're either a Jehovah's Witness or you're not. So we are literally out here saving everybody's life, the 99.9% of the world's population. And that's like pretty close to an accurate percentage.
Mm.
That is not Jehovah's Witnesses. We who have been fortunate enough to be born in this. Like, wow, what are the chances we were born in the only true religion? That's crazy, right? So we're trying to save the entire world. Like, forget you guys' traditions in this part of the world. You're doing it wrong. It's supposed to be like this, and God doesn't approve of anything that you're doing.
Mm.
So that's the life
I
that we
didn't grow
live.
up JW, but our evangelical Protestant groups weren't too far behind that. They would
Mm,
obviously have some theological differences, but we definitely felt the same way. Like it doesn't matter where you came from, you need to kind of count that as a loss and bow the knee to Christ. When we would use the word saved, to get saved, um, be born again, turn your life over to the Lord. When we talk about that as evangelicals, what we're referring to is an actual transaction, a conversation that you have that's very specific with God, where you would admit a few things. We used to call it, the bad news first and the good news. Bad news is you're born, a child of Adam and Eve. You've inherited their sin nature. You also committed your own sins. Therefore, by the sin you inherited and your sin nature, as well as the sins you've added to it personally, you are under God's judgment. You were under God's judgment from the moment you were conceived, but you're definitely under God's judgment now because as you're old enough to understand and talk about this stuff, you know that you are culpable and you need to have your sin dealt with. And therefore, you're facing judgment. Bad news is that's biblically going to be hell. But the good news is Jesus is God's son, and he came down, lived a perfect life, and then died and rose again. And his death was on your behalf. He took your punishment when he did that. Obviously, we're talking about atonement theory there, but um, most of my Christian upbringing was around people who are very much into atonement theories. Pretty much, that's the only way to really see it correctly. So I'm going to go that route. But Jesus was your substitute. If you identify with him, say, yes, I'm a sinner. I believe that you died for me and rose again. Identify with Christ's death and resurrection. Therefore, God gives you righteousness, not that you become righteous, but Christ's righteousness is put on you like a coat is put on you. And your sin is taken care of and you're sealed. Like that's it. You don't have to be good anymore. You don't have to try to earn your salvation anymore. Like that's it. Like it's a transaction. God says it's done. You're a child of God. You're sealed forever. And when you die, you're good, or you have peace with God. Would you say it's like that for JWs, or is it a different transaction and different experience?
So there were certain things that you said that I was like, yeah, that's kind of similar, and then a lot that was very different. And let me say this kind of at the outset. Jehovah's Witnesses, like a lot of these groups, they will poke at those types of beliefs and say, and highlight what they perceive to be the problems with them. So a lot of the things you're saying sound familiar because I heard them mentioned in a critical way in my former group talking about mainstream Christianity or whatever, right? Whatever that is. So so let me see. So in terms of, I guess, being saved, right? And they don't exactly use that term, but so I guess they don't believe in once saved, always saved. First of all,
Okay.
it's kind of like you begin your journey when you become baptized and a baptized Jehovah's Witness, right? Obviously, any other baptism is completely null and void, and God actually probably hates it, that other baptism that you did, right? So He's just been waiting for you to come around to the one that He actually recognizes. So um, the process is you have to study the publications, the publications printed by the Jehovah's Witness organization. You have to show that you agree with those publications. You have to show that you accept the governing body as the spokespeople for God, essentially. Um, and then once you have been learning and you get to a point where you have a basic understanding of everything that you need to understand to be a Jehovah's Witness, at that point you're supposed to pray and make that kind of similar to what you said, that prayer to God, where you know uh you repent of your sins, and I'm making commitment that I'm going to like walk in your path from this point forward, right? And then after that, you have to go through kind of a test of sorts. You meet with three separate elders, one elder at a time, but on three separate occasions, three different elders, and um, they ask you questions out of this book. You know, they want to make sure you understand. They want to make sure that you agree and all this kind of stuff. And then at the end of your going through, let's say it's like one elder meeting a week. And then after end of that 3 weeks or whatever, those three elders will meet and talk. What did you think? Blah blah. Blah. And then they will decide if you qualify to get baptized, right? So if they decide that you qualify to get baptized, at that point you're baptized. And the baptism questions, which is interesting, especially as now I'm learning a little bit more about mainstream Christianity, is part of the baptism. You stand up at this large meeting, and one of the questions is, have you something like, have you repented of your sins, and uh, are you dedicating yourself to do God's will, or something like that. And then the second question is, do you understand that your baptism identifies you as one of Jehovah's Witnesses in association with God's spirit directed organization? It's like you're marrying us, like you're getting married to us. It's very clear, even in the baptism questions. And so at that point, that's basically the way they consider it, is that's when it starts. Like before you got baptized, you basically had no chance of salvation. Now that you're baptized, at least you're baptized and you could start, doing things the way that God wants. But they always talk about, you need to really, like, you have to fight basically for your salvation at all times. You're constantly, again, like I told you before, even if you're at this level, but you have the capacity to go to this level, if you're not there, you're still not going to make it.
Hmm.
Like, you have to really be giving everything that you have. So it's always that kind of thing. It's always that kind of thing, like guilty, I'm not doing enough. And then I haven't even gotten started on all of the list of sins and transgressions that you're not supposed to be engaged in, even thought crimes,
Hmm.
right? Because God can see not just your actions, He can see your thoughts. And He didn't like what He saw when He turned on the monitor on your in your brain. So what are you watching that is feeding your mind with those thoughts? And it's like, oh yeah, there
Hmm.
was a movie and there was a kissing scene, and like it's just this constant mental, like, self-policing,
So if you
kind
if you did one of those sins and you hadn't confessed it yet, and then you
yeah.
died, say you died that night,
Mm-hmm.
um, would you pretty much say they would say you're in pretty grave danger of not being part of the kingdom?
Um, I think it depends on what level of sin. That's probably the best way that I can answer that, because there are tiers, so to speak. They don't say it exactly like that, but there are certain things that you can get excommunicated for and lose your whole family and everyone. So, like, let's say getting a blood transfusion, having sex before marriage, celebrating Christmas,
Wow.
going to other religious services, from another religion. All of those things put you on the chopping block, right? Like,
Mm.
um, you could, speaking out, openly disagreeing with the organization's leaders, especially speaking out publicly, like, all of that stuff is a no-go, right? And the list really goes on and on. Gluttony, you know, drunkenness, anything that they would classify as a drug, all kind of things. So that's kind of tier one, right? And then there's other things like that are kind of at a lower tier that you still have to kind of confess, but you can't get kicked out for it, but you're still
Okay.
supposed to confess it, right? And then there's like maybe a lower tier where it's like, I cursed today, and you may or may not have to confess all of those things, but you're supposed to be at the lowest tier. You're just supposed to work it out with God, I guess, right? But there's some that God is like, yeah, for that level, you got to go and talk to my representatives. It's
Mm.
basically kind of like that. So I was talking to them all the time because I never knew where the line was. They
Mm.
don't really tell you where the line is. I kind of figured it out, especially now that I left and read the book that I was never supposed to read because I was never an elder, but it's public knowledge because of their court cases and stuff, right?
Mm.
And I was like, oh, okay, so this was in this category. Kissing is in this category. You know, making out makes it this category. All these little, like, it's just crazy, and a lot of it. There's a lot of things of a sexual nature where it's kind of like it depends on your answer. If you answer a certain way and you say a certain thing happened, and now you're over in this whole other category that you didn't even really know where that line was.
Mm.
So it's
Good. Sorry, again.
no, go ahead. Go ahead.
When I was a Christian, I definitely would have said it sounds like a works salvation mentality, like you work to earn your salvation, as opposed to being safely, in the arms of God forever. But it's interesting to hear just the dynamic because, like you said, the thought crimes, you just constantly living thinking, what am I missing? And there's so much at stake. Like if you mess
Yeah.
up, and especially when issues where it's not necessarily completely willful in the sense of like you just talk back to your parents or you stole something from the store, but like where your hormones maybe are driving you and you like feel this urge to think about something, but you're feeling like maybe that's going to put me in the hot seat. Maybe I will actually be not in the kingdom. Can I ask just for clarification, what is the afterlife look like for people? Like what does it look like for people that don't make it? Is it hell, like we would say, with burning fire? Is it annihilation? How do you all see it?
So they don't believe in excuse me, they don't believe in hellfire.
Okay.
That belief was done away with very early in the organization's history. And of course, they would criticize mainstream Christianity for having, for their interpretation of the scriptures that would seem to support, hellfire. I
Mm.
don't have a dog in that fight, by the way, but I'm just saying, I know
Yeah.
there's a back and forth about what these texts mean, right? Which I don't think is the best use of our time, but
Yeah. By a long
but
shot.
but anyway, so, but for people who basically don't make it, which is going to be the vast majority of people, and even a certain percentage of Jehovah's Witnesses, it's just destruction. So,
Mhm.
like, once the end comes, if you haven't been doing what you're supposed to do, you just be dead. There's no eternal torment or anything like that. And if you have, you will be given the opportunity for the vast majority of people to live on a paradise earth. They believe in that more than heaven. There is a heavenly belief, but it is like really a footnote of the Jehovah's Witness, you know, concept on the afterlife. And you may have heard, not to get too far into the weeds, but you may have heard the number 144,000. So
Mhm.
they believe that 144,000 from the time of Jesus up until now have been selected by God to be in heaven. But it's basically like it's no diss if you weren't selected, right?
Right.
That's how they keep people happy about the other hope, because it's going to be the vast majority. There's going to be millions of people that are going to be on the earth. and these people that are going to heaven, God just he needed some people. It doesn't mean that you're better than whatever.
Just out of
Just
curiosity, do the 144,000 get to travel back and forth and like see their loved ones on the paradise earth, or is there like a barrier?
No, no, that's not a teaching. I mean, I don't know if I've ever seen anything written on that one way or another, but that's not a
Hmm.
I've never, because they're supposed to get these spirit bodies, right? And so they're
Okay.
only supposed to reside in the heavenly realm. So it's kind of a yeah.
So like if you
I
made it
don't
to
think
paradise, but your wife was one of 144,000,
yeah.
then you both get to proceed to the afterlife in a good
Yes,
sense, but you don't see each other anymore at that point because she's
exactly.
okay. Interesting.
Yep. Yeah,
That's
that's the
that's really
belief.
crazy. That's
Yeah.
so
But the
you
chances go ahead.
you can really feel like you're like I would think you could wonder if you're dreading it if you're like husband and wife are both like we both really 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 believe that
Yeah.
we want to spend eternity together, but you're like you're not going to see each other anymore because one of you is whatever more holy or more special or more selected, and it's
Yeah.
like it's a bizarre spot to put people in my mind.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, now your chances of having a wife that's part of that small number is very low.
Yeah.
And the way that they do it is it's basically like they say they use the analogy of it's as clear as a boy knowing he's a boy and a girl knowing that she is a girl. That's how clearly God will communicate which one of those hopes you should be counting on, right? Like
Mm.
it's just something that's unmistakable inside of you, and you just know. So if you ever talk to somebody who professes to be of that group, and you ask them like, hey, how did you know? And it's just like, I just knew, God just communicated with me, blah blah. And
Mm.
so yeah, it's just kind of one of those honor system kind of things. But they're not gonna accept and believe that somebody is a member of that special group unless they're doing everything everything to their power to promote the organization. Even if you are doing that, it doesn't mean you'll be selected. But that's if you come around saying like, "Hey, I've been chosen," blah blah. They want to start, they kind of want to look at your record a little bit and be like, I don't know,
Mm.
your life course hasn't really it doesn't really match up. So it's just kind of one of those things.
I say this tongue in cheek, but it would be interesting to if they could have kept a log this whole time
Yeah.
of the numbers, and if
Mm.
they're like, shoot, we're getting up to like 160,000 people now that have claimed this thing, we're in trouble.
Right.
But you mentioned the publications. How is the Bible? And I appreciate you entertaining my questions, just because there are
Yeah.
some significant differences from what I'm used to.
Right.
But what is the Bible itself? How is that different for them? And are there multiple Bibles or just a different Bible? And like, what does the word watchtower mean in that context?
So the Bible is one Bible that they use. They pride themselves on saying that they will consult other translations and other versions of the Bible in their publications. Every once in a while, they'll quote from another version of the Bible that conveys more clearly the thought that they're trying to get across. Um, but for the most part, the standard Bible is the Bible that they have produced, and the translators, the names of the translators are like not public. So it's just again, it's kind of an honor system thing. You don't know what these people's qualifications are to interpret or translate Greek, Aramaic, and Hebrew. But it's just like just trust us. We're working with the people that God likes, so it's all
What
good.
what's the name of the Bible?
The New World Translation of the Holy
Okay.
Scriptures.
Okay.
Yeah.
So there's no like second extra. It's not like the Mormons with the Book of Mormon. It's just like there's one book. It's the Bible.
There's one book, but your understanding of that book is given to you by the publications, right?
Right.
So if you read the scripture, for example, about blood, or a scripture about blood, and it says you must not eat blood, and you're thinking to yourself, yeah, I shouldn't eat blood, and then the leaders say that also means no blood transfusions. Well, you defer to what they say that it means, right?
Right.
So, yes, the Bible is the main thing, but you can't interpret it on your own. And if you do, if especially if you start saying like, "Hey guys, you really think this about blood transfusions like thousands of years ago? You think that he had that in mind? Like, no life saving blood transfusions when I said don't eat blood. But you just don't. It's not something you question. You don't even really allow yourself to go there mentally because that's kind of starting you around along a dangerous road. So
Hmm.
if that answers the question, so the Watchtower is, that's part of the name of the corporation. But then in addition to that, it is it's the main their main publication, right? Is the Watchtower magazine,
Okay.
and the idea is kind of like this is like a watchtower that would kind of alert people, right? Because of the light, they can see things that everybody else can't see, and they kind of sound alarm. They're keeping on the watch. So that's the idea: is that this group, mainly that governing body at the very top, they're keeping a watch for things that we can't see, and then they're kind of telling us about it.
Hmm. Whenever I hear the word watchtower, I think I shouldn't, but in the Lord of the Rings, that all-seeing eye, what's it called, the Eye of Sauron? It reminds me of that, like that. I'm seeing you all, and I'm looking for the bad guys, and I can, if you put the ring of whatever invisibility on, I can see you now.
I'm
Um,
ashamed to say I've never seen Lord of the Rings.
oh no,
I know it's terrible. It's like you call that living. I know. I got it. There's so many. That would have been one of those things I wasn't supposed to watch as a Jehovah's Witness. So there's a lot. There's so many things, these classic shows and movies and stuff that it's almost a daunting task to go back and be like, okay, now let me watch them. I think I just kind of keep up with whatever's out right now. But I
yeah.
know I always hear about Lord of the Rings and all these other things, and I'm like, man, I gotta get up on that stuff.
I hear you. No, well, it was
Bad.
it's basically like a evil force that gets that's already kind of in existence, but it kind of gets centralized in this fire eye that's like at the top of a tower. But it can,
Okay.
even though it's in one spot, it can kind of see far, far away and see what people are doing. And anyway, I digress. With your story, with that background, I mean, I appreciate you sharing some of that background, and I've a thousand other questions I could ask about it just because I'm so curious how it works. But so you grew up in this completely believing that this was all real. So your expectation, if I'm understanding it correctly, is that you were going to hopefully, fingers crossed, live a very good life in which you bowed your knee to the Bible, to their Bible, and to the leadership of the church, the organization. You confessed your sins and did the right thing, repented when you were wrong, and showed a life of righteousness, is the word I would have used. So you're now living a righteous life. You get to the end of your life, you die. What would happen? Would you go immediately to this new paradise? Is it like somewhere that's existing where you just die for a while and stay dead, and then in a couple thousand years that starts over? Like, what was the actual timeline looking like for you?
Yeah, so the idea is um we're living in the last days, like the last part of the last days. So any
Okay.
second now, this thing could be over, right?
Hmm.
So you just better stay on your toes at the edge of your seat. Um, so the idea, I remember growing up, and this thing's been around for so long, it's like almost laughable if it wasn't so sad. But you know, they used to say, I think in the 60s, they used to come out with these publications like, look how the world is, look how it's lining up with Bible prophecy. Children, do you really think you're even going to get to high school? Like, you probably won't even make it to high school before this thing is over. And they were saying that in the 60s, right?
Hmm.
I mean, printing it in the 60s, that who knows how long they've been. I mean, no, actually, I do know. In the early 1900s, they originally thought 1914 was going to be the year that the world was going to end, right? And then they later revised and said, well, what we meant is, or yeah, we were a little bit off. Maybe we got a little bit excited, but something did happen. Something invisible happened. That's the way to fix it, right?
Like a
Something invisible happened
spiritualized.
yeah, something that we wouldn't be able to see or prove. So there you go. It must be true.
Hmm.
Um, so so especially, like I said, if they were printing that in the 60s, I was a child growing up in the 90s. Oh man, it should have been here. Yes, like it's immediate. We might not get to tonight before the end comes. And so um
Wow.
I'm like I'm kind of forgot a little bit about your what was your specifically your question
Just
about
so what,
what my expectations were,
like
right?
with in terms of the
Yeah.
timeline for after you die, what happens next?
Right. Yes. So so yeah, so that's where I was going with that. So how it works is if you die and there's still time before the end comes, then you stay dead, but there's no consciousness of it. And the idea is once you're resurrected in paradise, it was like you just blinked your eye,
Okay.
right? So because that time is you didn't perceive any of that time. Um, if the end comes today, you will be um kind of protected and just brought straight into that new world. And then those people that have died in the past that are, have God's favor, they will be brought to life as well. So that
Okay.
that was my hope. I mean, I always felt like it was shaky for me, even as much as I did more than the vast majority of people that were ever members.
Hmm.
And I never thought that I was a slam dunk. And I think it's not, I think it's designed that way pretty intentionally. And it kind of makes sense for their business model,
Like
you
you
know.
feared falling away.
Oh yeah,
Hmm.
always, always. I
So
always, yeah.
could you fall away in the paradise once you got there?
Yeah, so that's another kind of like tricky thing about the teachings. Some of that stuff is not super clear, if you ask me, being a member. But yes, it is possible that in the new world. So the idea, the most recent teaching, because like I said, it changes. It can change over time, and then you just have to move with it. But I believe the most recent teaching that I remember is you will have in the new world, you will in the paradise, you will have a perfect body and a perfect mind. So if at that point you start messing up, then okay, then it's over because you have a perfect body and mind and you're still not listening. So
Hmm.
you still there's still it's still possible to get killed. It would just be swift and
Hmm.
like immediate. It wouldn't be all this. Well, let's give them a chance to figure it out. Um, and the idea is Adam and Eve, that's why they will have no chance of being resurrected because they have perfect bodies and minds. And they still, did this thing with the fruit and the serpent and blah, blah. So it's like
Hmm.
what's the word? They have no excuse. They have no forgiveness for that. So that's basically how it was.
So you're basically living. I remember that old cartoon with Tom and Jerry, and I'm sure others did it, where that one of the animals would have like a big anvil that was like tied up to the ceiling with a rope, and the other one would chop it. So you're basically like living with this anvil over your head that you blink wrong, you sneeze wrong, and you're screwed.
Yep.
But I mean, the good thing is, I guess, if there's a good thing to it, you're not going to burn in hell, but you're still
Yeah.
not going to see the goodness of paradise. But you were thinking that you had a shot at achieving this, but you were very fearful that you might mess up.
Yeah.
When I was a Christian, we had this concept. It was very pivotal to everything that, God is he's your judge, he's the king. So there's a respect issue. But at the same time, you're a child of the king, you've been adopted. And so there is a sense of an intimacy there, a security, a peace. And so when you would go do what we would call quiet time and devotions, you open your Bible, ask God to speak to you through his word, and you talk to him, share with him what he already knows, but, talk to him. That whole dynamic, the experience of it and the push in the messaging was, this is meant to be an intimate love relationship where you completely trust God and you give yourself to him in the most I should say, you completely give yourself to God in the sense that he is utterly safe. Not because he's a safe God, he's a very unsafe God in one sense, but he's safe to you because you are in Christ. You're
Mm.
secure. It sounds like that was not the way they would have framed it for you. Is that fair to say?
Yeah, yes, I think that is fair to say. I mean, yes, you are supposed to have an intimate relationship with God, so to speak, in that you're constantly consuming the Bible, and constantly praying. You're supposed to, there's this thing that would just kind of get repeated where they would say, if you know how many times you prayed today, you haven't prayed enough, right? Just imagine just hearing that, like, man, did I pray enough today? Nope. And not if I can count. I counted eight. It's not enough. Like it's crazy. So um you're supposed to be doing that, but again, it very much goes through. I mean, there's definitely an intermediary, a mediator, so to speak, and that's it's basically these publications and whatever direction comes down from the governing body, and that's so so I guess it's kind of it feels maybe a little like double speak now, right? Because it's like it's not just it's he and I, but through all of them, right? Because he's put them in that position. So anything that you need or anything that you have to go telling yourself about or whatever, they're the ones to like handle it.
Interesting.
Yeah.
So, were you feeling called to full-time ministry when you were still in it?
You said, was I feeling called to it?
Yeah, like were you feeling called to be a full-time minister, either in terms of witnessing more than ever or becoming a pastor or whatever they would have called it, or were you happy to just be one of the lay people? Like, what was your expectation if you'd stayed in it?
So I had the loftiest of ambitions within that context. I mean, first of all, like I said, just going to at the headquarters, I mentioned it recently. I mentioned on ice on Instagram. It's kind of like somebody playing basketball and then getting to the league. Getting to the NBA. It's kind of like that. It's kind of like these are the rock stars, if you will, of this thing. They're working at this place. They're being paid about $130 per month. Okay. Working 44 hours a week, overtime when called upon. Like these are considered like, wow, if you're there, first of all, like to get accepted is rare. And then to be willing to go, those two things like come together, it's like, wow, that's he's the standard, right? That is kind of like how that goes. So anyway, that's already kind of a lofty thing. But like I said, at every level, you're constantly thinking, okay, well, what else am I supposed to be doing, right? So I wanted to be what's called a circuit overseer. That was my goal. Circuit overseer is above the elders. So right, there's elders in the congregation. Circuit overseer is kind of like a regional manager, right? So he goes and he covers 20 congregations and he checks in on the elders like, okay, you guys doing what you're supposed to do? Let me see the records. How many hours have people been putting in? He's kind of like that guy. And then he has an overseer and then he has an over. So, just like any corporation, right, or company. So yeah, that was my goal. I didn't think I was ever going to have children because as you can probably imagine, most of those positions up higher, including being at the headquarters and stuff, you can't do with children, right? So they actually kind of tell you, especially if you're young and you have energy and stuff, you really need to just be focusing on giving this all of your attention and all of your energy. So a lot of couples, my sister, for example, right? She always loved children, but they're off in the Dominican Republic and doing all of these different things, and they've not had children, and they're not going to have children because they want to give themselves, completely of this. And the publications will kind of tell you that, like, you sure you want to have kids? Like, you sure you even want to get married? Like, like it's kind of like it's these little nudgings. And so you're
Hmm.
constantly like, okay, should I do this or should I be? And so, yeah, if you're doing it the way that they say, you're always looking to just do as much as you can. And so that's basically where I was at with it.
Can I ask, when you look at the Jehovah's Witnesses overall, in terms of the whole organization, as well as your particular experience in your local community, would you say that your experience was unique at all because of you being a black man, or would you say that what you experienced would have been, pretty much similar no matter what, what race or whatever color your skin is?
That's a great question. I would say that overall, it was just because of being in the Jehovah's Witness organization. I mean, yes, there were experiences that I had that I would kind of relate to being black, or the reason why I had certain experiences in there is because I was black. But if I'm being honest, I don't think that really characterizes, a significant portion of the experience. I think the things that are most disturbing to me have nothing to do with that. They're
Gotcha.
just it's just the brainwashing and the emotional manipulation that I think, um, you know, all of us suffer from. What I will say though, kind of along those lines, is you take something like, for example, higher education, right? So they frown upon higher education. It's again, there's tiers, right, of sin. So you're not going to get kicked out of the organization for attending a university, but you're constantly told that it is a waste of time, that it'll corrupt your mind. You're told these horror stories about this guy who was a gung ho Jehovah's Witness, went to university, and now he's an atheist. He doesn't even believe in God. Like, so just imagine how dangerous that is over there with those philosophers and their ideas. Um, so, as you can probably imagine, there are some communities that are going to be more adversely affected by that than others, right? There's some communities that won't ever have, uh, you know, money in their family really, like from before, right? For them to just kind of like, okay, well, I can get started. I have 50K I could get started with, and then like just window wash, just do what they tell me to do. At least I have something. There's some of these communities where I think, you know, if you like, I come from a, bad neighborhood. I come from a bad neighborhood. My parents, they did the best they could. My dad probably would have did okay if he didn't have so many kids, but there were so many of us. So, I'm as I'm looking around, I'm in this bad neighborhood. I have a 4.0 GPA. My grades are through the roof, in high school. And it's kind of like with the direction you're getting from the leaders is, those counselors, they're going to want to, they're going to be trying to push you into university, but like that's not really the best. So here I am sitting here in a position where, and again, like I've said before, I'm not saying that going to university is the only way out, but to not even have it available to you in a situation like that, where people around you just in general don't have much in your prospects of, you know, having living a comfortable life from a monetary standpoint is very little. You have this kid that's doing really well, and you're like, yeah, don't go. In fact, it's like it's bad for you to go, right? So
Mm.
instead of going to college, I graduated high school with my 4.0 GPA, and I went to go serve at the headquarters for $113 a month. Like, it's just so, but again, like I said, there's other families come from different backgrounds that their whole thing about like not going to college or not trying to start a business or whatever, it wasn't as bad because they had, they were in a better situation monetarily. They at least had people in their family that could share how money works maybe and different things like that, right? So that's I think that's where that could kind of come into play a little bit more, if I'm being honest.
Well, again, I've got like a thousand other questions about how JWs work, but I know that the main point of what we're here for is to get to this question, so to speak, or the starting point of you're in it. You obviously believed it. You thought it was all real. You had lofty expectations and goals. What, one question, what the hell happened? Because
Huh.
you obviously took a turn somewhere.
I did. So I have been working for years to tell a succinct version of this story. So I'm gonna try again. I'm gonna try again today. Basically what happened is as I was, all gung-ho and, giving public discourses in three different languages and just this super witness. Um, the whole time there were always kind of things that didn't really make sense to me, but you're not really supposed to go there mentally, and Satan is the one who plants those doubts in your head. So all you're really doing, you can try to research it, whatever your question is within their publications, keep it within their publications. If the answer doesn't satisfy you enough, maybe you just aren't in a position to get it right now. You just don't have the capacity to get it, but just trust God and it's going to work out, or just like forget about it, and just try to just move forward, push it down, right? And so I always had those, and I always just ignored it and like what you're supposed to do. And then I think one of the turning points for me was I had so when someone leaves the organization and becomes especially like it is known that they don't believe in it anymore and they've kind of made that public because see you can be excommunicated because you had sex and then still believe it fully and just say I don't have the discipline to abide by the rules, but that's still the truth over there, right? And I'd say I know more people that are excommunicated like that than are like me, which is a whole nother interesting dynamic. But so when I'm shortly after I was excommunicated, I had a couple of friends who were not only excommunicated, but also it was known that they didn't believe it was true anymore. And they were calling it a cult and stuff like that. You started to hear, hey, did you hear that Charlie isn't they use the word apostate? That's the worst, that's the dirtiest word in the Jehovah's Witness lexicon. I mean, it's worse
Mm.
than murderer or fill in the blanks, right? Whatever you think is the worst crime you can imagine, apostate is the worst because you had the truth and you left it, and especially if you're speaking out against it, oh, you're the worst of the worst, and there's probably no forgiveness for you at all. Is that's kind of one of those things. It's like, yeah, you can't really come back from that. You can't really redeem yourself from that. So anyway,
Can I ask,
when
clarify,
you're
do they
supposed
literally believe that? Like that you truly, once you've made that jump, you truly cannot come back, or just that it's unlikely?
I would say just very unlikely. I mean,
Yeah.
yeah, I think with everything they say, you get the notion that it's kind of almost impossible.
Yeah. Like you've
Um,
sealed your fate, apart
Basically,
from the grace of God.
yeah, because now you're working against God. Like, imagine that. I'm actually pitting myself against the sovereign of the universe, and he's like, "I'm taking you out as soon as it's time. You're out of here."
It's like he's the
So
Godfather.
yeah, it's crazy. So anyway, so I had two friends that were, that went that route. And it's crazy because you're supposed to slap all these adjectives on apostates, like they're this, they're that, they're that, that. And I was having cognitive dissonance because I was like, yeah, they're not like that though. Like I actually know these people, you know? And I don't know what happened. I mean, I'm very surprised. I'm shocked that people that I had such a close relationship with would ever, get excommunicated and become apostates. But I'm having a little bit of trouble fitting them in this box though, and it's not something I ever discussed. I just was battling with it for years. Eventually I got to a point where it was just too many things, right? That just kind of opened the door, and then just too many things. I was like, yeah, this is stupid and this is kind of silly, and like, why does this happen? And these different things. I've been preaching this one message for 10 years, and now they're telling me, well, we got new light, so now I'll start saying this. And I'm like, what's the point of me learning all of this stuff if it's just like changing? Like, this is crazy. And why would God be doing that? Like, what kind of sick joke is that? Like, at one point, God supposedly said that organ transplants are the equivalent of being a cannibal. Getting an organ transplant is the equivalent to cannibalism, right? That was a teaching before, right? People died, as you can imagine, right? I'm gonna be faithful to God. I don't see that in the Bible, but his representative said that that's what it says. So we're gonna try everything we can, but if it comes down to it, hey, I'll see you guys all in the new world for like my faithfulness, right? But then years later, it's like, you know what? We got some new light, and organ transplants is nothing like cannibalism. Wow. Well, my uncle's dead. So, I mean, it's like that. But you don't think, even in that case, you're still kind of supposed to just be like, well, he was faithful, he was obedient, and God blesses the obedience. It's like really twisted now that I'm thinking about it.
That's so
Um,
crazy.
but
Were you,
after a while, go ahead.
were you allowed to talk to the people that were apostates to ask them about their story, or were you just like, you got to walk away?
No, absolutely. Those are you're not even supposed to talk to people that are excommunicated that I told you that are kind of in the other category where they just didn't follow the rules and they got kicked out. You're not even supposed to talk to them, let alone people who are openly God's enemies, right? The way that they describe it. So no, not at all. And if you think about it, they kind of have to do it that way. I mean, if you allowed people to kind of speak to people, I don't think this thing stands. You have to kind of
Yeah.
keep it like that in order to function, right? So
Mhm. Were you able to
obviously I'm not go ahead.
were you able to investigate a little bit, like to on your own stealthily and figure out what they were up to?
No, no, you're not supposed to do that at all. You're supposed to just treat them like they don't exist at that
Okay.
point. And so I had to imagine I had to do that with two of my close friends, which, so anyway, things just started to add up. And eventually, I got to a point where the cognitive dissonance was so strong and I was like losing weight and I was just getting depressed because I was like, but it doesn't make sense. Like I'm trying, like, and I would pray to God, like, God, please, like I must be losing it. Satan's getting in me or something. Like I'm struggling. Like I would literally have prayers say, like, I'm struggling. Can you please, like, I'm trying, like, help me, like, believe it. Imagine praying to a God to ask him to help you believe in him and believe that it's crazy. So I was doing that and I could never get to that point. Eventually, I just stopped going to the services because I just didn't have the energy. I just was like, I wouldn't eat and I just was like, whatever. So I kind of stopped being so careful on like not transgressing, once you don't have that push, you're just doing things that you naturally do, all of which are prohibited. But, so it's like whether it's hanging out with women or whatever, and so what happened is I got to a point where my dad knew that I wasn't going anymore. And I wasn't trying to hide it. I was like, Dad, I'm like depressed. I was like, I don't know what it's just things that I didn't even go into details. I was like, well, there's just things that just after all these years and all these sacrifices I've made, I just hope this is real because, like, I passed up a lot of opportunities in life. Like, I hope this is legit. And at this point, I'm so far in, it's like, and so my dad was like, hey, maybe you just need to, blah blah. He gave me the little talk back, well intentioned, I'm sure. He's trying to trying to talk me off the ledge, like, hey, just give it another chance. Maybe it's just maybe you were frustrated because of this and whatever rationale, right? So I was like, okay, let me try this again. Now that I've kind of gone through this process of like at least being forced to kind of deal with the doubts. Let me try it again, right? But because I was trying to be a very good Jehovah's Witness, the right thing to do in that situation is by then I had committed some transgressions on the top tier, right? So me just being an honest person, right, and trying to give something God something to bless because I'm thinking, what's the point of trying to go through it if I'm like hiding these sins? Then I'm not even giving myself a fair chance to reevaluate this. So I'm like, okay, I'm just gonna confess. Whatever happens, happens, and I'm just gonna give this another shake because I just need to know one way or the other. Like, I just need to figure this out. So that's what I did. I called up the elders and I said, hey, I've been having doubts. This has been happening, by the way. I had sex and this and blah, blah, whatever. Right. And so the I had sex is like, all right, we need to have a trial. Right. So this is maybe something kind of to provide some context. So remember how I said there's these sins at the top tier, right, for which you can be excommunicated. For the most part, there's no such thing as an automatic excommunication, even after doing one of those things. How it works is once it comes to the elder's attention that you have done these things, either through your own confession or somebody telling on you, which is something that they're all supposed to be doing. If you see somebody or you have knowledge of somebody doing something, especially at these high levels, you're supposed to approach them and say, you have 7 days to go and tell on yourself. And if you don't do it, then I'm gonna have to do it, right?
Hmm.
So um once they find out about it, they call a trial, right? And the trial is not to determine if you did it or not. By the time the trial happens, they've determined that you've done it, right? The trial is to determine your level of repentance, okay, for what you did. And like I said, now that I've read the book, their book, I'm like, so tears. There's like very specific things they're supposed to look for. You know, tears. Is he just sorry because he got caught, or is he sorry because he damaged his relationship with God? Like they're listening for very specific things for you to say. And your life is literally like on the line. And they're just kind of doing this thing. So you go in the meeting, first of all, to show your repentance, to give yourself a chance to demonstrate your repentance, you first have to give them all the gory details, right? So if it is sex, it's what was the position? Was there an orgasm? Um, and what's crazy is going through this as a grown man, almost 30, is terrible. But imagine being like a young woman that's 15 with these three dudes asking you these questions. Like, I can't even. I mean, and I know people that have gone through that meeting at that age, and it's just crazy. Um, so that's what happens. They go into all of these details, and they want you basically. You're supposed to really humble yourself and just give them everything, and that's still not a guarantee. But they ask you, so are you sorry? Why are you sorry? Why did it take you so long to tell us? Why didn't you come to us sooner before you get blah blah blah? And they do this whole thing. And then after you say what you're going to say, they say, please step out. They deliberate, and then they call you back in. And they tell you what the decision is, right? And there are two ways that meeting could go. One, you can be reproved, which is kind of like a probation. It's kind of like a slap on the wrist. And even within reproof, there's public reproof and private reproof. All right. It might be getting a little bit into the weeds, but I think it's just contextual. It helps. So private reproof means you're on this probation, but we're not going to announce it to everybody. So just know that you can't do certain things within the congregation. And maybe people start to kind of put it together, especially if you were doing all this stuff and then now you're not. They'd be like, okay, that guy must got in trouble, or that woman must have got in trouble. There's public reproof, which is an announcement saying such and such has been reproved. That lets everybody know you've committed one of these top tier sins, but you've demonstrated enough repentance to where we're not going to completely excommunicate you and tell everybody to cut you off, right? And then the last is disfellowshipping, which is the excommunication. So if you come back in and they say, you know what, we don't think you've demonstrated enough repentance. Um, so we're going to make the announcement that you have been disfellowshipped, and that announcement reverberates around the world, especially somebody like me who was all over the world. People, hey, did you hear blah blah? It's like, oh, him, this is big scandal. Like, this is big crazy. It's like a death or like somebody like he duped me all those years. I thought he was so like this, and now it turns out he's like, it's just this crazy thing. Like person's completely demonized, like completely demonized.
Hmm.
And so yeah, so that's what happened. I went through that meeting. I was crying. I was just scared. And I was being, my problem is I was too honest. If I'm being honest, that's what it was. if I had gone there and said, hey, like, okay, I had sex, for example, and like I feel really bad about it, and da da da, like maybe I would have had a shot. But if you can't go into one of these meetings and say I had sex and I've been questioning if this is the true religion. Like, yeah, you're not really helping your case here, right? So it's like that was like kind of based on their publications, they kind of have to like kick you out. I
So
mean, based on yeah.
when they do that, was there any party that was thinking I got to work myself back in,
Oh
or were
yeah.
you okay? So you weren't necessarily trying to be like, all right, fine, let's just part ways. If you're going to disfellowship me, I guess I'm not a JW anymore, and I never will
Yeah.
be. You weren't thinking like that. You were thinking I got to figure out how to clean my life up.
Well, in part, like I said, at that stage, I just wasn't sure. I mean, the scary part is losing everybody, regardless of what it is I'm thinking about doing later. I'm basically deciding, am I going to try to see these people again, or is this just all these people just gone from my life, and do I have to start life completely over with no evidence of my existence before age 28? Quite literally, like there's no, you could
Hmm.
imagine meeting somebody later in life and being like, yeah, there's all these people that can vouch for who I am, but unfortunately, they all have to shut 100% of them. But what about your mom? Yeah, her too. Your brother? Like, what do you mean? Your grandparents? Your 80-year-old grandparents? What? So it's just,
That's crazy.
kind of realizing that is very scary. Um, so my idea once I got to that point, I just said, okay, well, I guess I'm gonna just try to work my way back, and just again, I'm kind of doing this thing where I'm like, okay, I'm taking my licks, and I'm gonna try to go back or try to figure this out, like one way or the other, right? So once you're disfellowshipped or excommunicated, you can still attend the meetings, the services. You just can't talk to anybody. Nobody's going to make eye contact with you. No one's going to even acknowledge you in any way. You just kind of sneak, you kind of slip in the
Hmm.
back, and then you slip out. But the elders are watching, and they want to watch that over a period of several months or years. There are people who do that for years, trying to come back, submitting letters, because after how it works is they want to see you going. If they peek over your shoulder and they see your magazine, they want to see that you've been taking notes in it and stuff like that. And then you can submit a letter requesting reinstatement. That could go on for a really long time. You request reinstatement, and then they're asking like, okay, have you been having sex? Have you been doing this? Have you been blah? Whatever it is, like, whatever the thing is. And um, so then, that's when you have the opportunity to get reinstated. So I decided like, okay, I'm gonna just go to the meetings. And so I started going back to the meetings as a disfellowshipped person, right? And it's one of those things where you're in something and you can't really see what's going on, even though something feels kind of weird. And then you step out of it, you're just looking at these people and you're like, what? This is crazy. you know, it was the weirdest thing in the world. I'm like, this is what I've been doing. Like, this is like psychotic, like all the stuff that they're talking about and the jokes and everything. And I'm just like, okay, maybe it was just that congregation. Let me try another congregation. I'm trying to rationalize it. Because again, if I come to the conclusion that I'm not doing this anymore, everybody's gone permanently. So this is not something I can take lightly. Like I'm trying to make it make sense to myself. So I'm going, and it didn't take long, man. It was maybe like I was Jehovah's Witness my whole life. It took like 2 weeks of going from that perspective of being outside. And I was like, something's off, bro.
Hmm.
I got honest. Something's like really off with this thing. I don't know anything else. I was born into this, but something's wrong, right? I finally did what they would consider the worst thing you could do. I started looking up apostate stuff online, and I started watching videos, started hearing testimonies. I was like, yeah, that's exactly how I feel. Like it's so obvious. It really doesn't take long. It's super obvious. It's so obvious. And so I don't know anybody who's really fully done the research that hasn't come out of it the same way that I have, coming to the same conclusion. So
Hmm.
um, it just kind of confirms everything you thought, and then you just keep watching and keep watching. And so I kind of got to a point where and I read the book of the former governing body member. That's like the main thing people do when they leave, they discover this book, right? Because obviously they won't talk about it in there. But they're like, oh, there was a governing body member that left. Like, he's like, not to be, it's like, we don't talk about Bruno kind of thing. They never discuss him. So you read this book and you're like, oh my God, they had control over my life, like just all, on a whim. They're just in these meetings and they just kind of coming up with this policy that really was difficult for me to comply with. And like, you start to find out all of this stuff. And it didn't take long. It was like a couple of weeks, and I was like, I can't go back in there, man.
Mm.
It was
I'm
very, very painful conclusion to come to, but I just like I really believed it. I was only a Jehovah's Witness because I believed it. I
yeah.
wasn't a Jehovah's Witness just because, right? So like I was always very serious about it. So now that we're at the point where it doesn't make sense, and I'm seeing all this, the Wizard of Oz kind of thing, the man behind the curtain. I'm like, bro, I can't be in there. And some people do, and I have no judgment for that. Like there's some people who say, you know what, I need my family, so I'm gonna play the game and do that. Absolutely no judgment for that. I don't think it's cool to be in my situation where you cut off from everybody. Everybody's got to make their own decision. I just have never been wired that way just because of how I approached the religion. And so anyway, at that point, I wrote an email to my dad. I was like, hey dad, no, when I got to this fellowship, I told you I was going to try to come back. But, you know, I'm just being very honest. I literally do not believe it anymore. It's no disrespect to anything, blah, blah. And that email was never responded to. Eventually, like, I drove all the way to where he lives and was like, hey, like, how could it's emotional at that point, like, how are you just gonna turn your back on me? I was sincere. It's not like I was just I'm being very honest. Like, I'm literally here because of my honesty. If I didn't go tell on myself to the elders, we're not even in this position, right? Like, the whole thing was based off of me trying to do it the best that I could, and so, but anyway, that's what happened. So I lost everybody, haven't spoken to, that was April 2016, haven't spoken to basically anybody since then. So
What
yeah.
what happened when you drove to see your dad? Did he even acknowledge you were there?
Yeah, so I drove. So when my girlfriend was pregnant, about 4 years ago or so, I so okay, a little bit of context, right? So when I say that the communication is basically cut off 100%, there are little, like for example, my grandfather was excommunicated. But when he was basically on his deathbed, when he had a heart attack, that's kind of, you can go and see that person, right? So if it's like a life or death thing, or maybe there's business or something, there's very, very few exceptions, and they always tell you to reduce those exceptions. Like, don't try to overuse these exceptions, basically. Make sure you're not, police yourself and make sure you're not just using it as an excuse to talk to this person, right? So anyway, I reached out to my dad. I drove all the way over there, and I reached out to my dad, and I called him and I said, hey, I have something to tell you, right? So I have something to tell you could mean what? I have a terminal disease. Whatever. It could mean anything. So it's like, okay, we'll take the meeting kind of thing, right? So I met with him, my mother, and I told him, hey, I'm going to be a father and, whatever. And that was the last time I talked to him, and that's been, like I said, over 4 years. So that's basically been the extent of any communication.
What did they say in that meeting?
Nothing,
Mm.
nothing. Yeah, it's not really like anything I think to say. It's just kind of like, I'm just letting you guys know. And I don't even know why. I just wanted to tell them it's just so unnatural that my baby is not gonna, he's gonna be like, Dad, why do we only have family on mom's side? Like, eventually that question's coming up.
Yeah,
So, I'm, I was just trying to, I don't know, I'm not even sure what I was trying to do. I just wanted to let them know. And so, yeah, they didn't really say anything. They're just like, oh, thanks for telling us, kind of thing. It was very business like, robotic kind of, oh, thanks for letting us know. We hope you're doing okay, kind of thing. And that was pretty much it.
gotcha. I
Yeah.
guess they're supposed to protect their minds and so forth anyway, seeing you as an apostate.
Exactly, exactly. Yeah.
Hmm.
Which my mother called me, like, looked in my eyes, and I was saying something. It wasn't even anything too controversial, but she's like, we can't listen to apostates. Like, it's like, what
Hmm.
do you mean? I'm your son. Like, it's just crazy. It's so crazy when you look into somebody's eyes that this woman gave birth to me. Like, what? What are we talking about?
Hmm.
But she's like apostate. It's like robot. She's like a robot, with that. It's really, really sad. But
How many years
that's,
ago
yeah.
was that?
That conversation was 4 years about 4 years ago when
Hmm.
my son was on the way. Yeah, that was pretty much it.
So barring them having a revelation that they're in a really bad system, they're most likely going to go to their deaths, not
Yep.
really allowed to talk to you.
Yep. Yep. That's exactly what the way it's looking right now. Yeah, they
Hmm.
along with most other people. Every once in a while, I get a phone call from somebody from my past, like, "Hey, man," I even mentioned it in one of my songs. Um, the line in the song is they constantly hit my line and they say, "Bro, you wasn't wrong." Right. So I have people coming and saying, like, "Hey, man, I was one of the people talking crazy about you when you left. Like, I figured it out." Like, so I get those calls, but so far it's still never been a family member. I still haven't got a family member, and not even most of my friends. There's been literally like a handful. It's just twice a year I get one of these calls, right?
Yeah.
So yeah, you never know. It actually kind of something I find interesting. I found out later my brother was disfellowshipped also. Um, and so, but again, that doesn't mean that you're, where we are, right? So he was disfellowshipped, and then once I heard that, I got his number and I called him. And the first time it rang, the second time he blocked me. So I'm like, okay, so I'm still
Just
dangerous, even for disfellowshipped people that are still
yeah.
brainwashed.
So he could
I
be
still
dis
represent. Go ahead.
so he's probably disfellowshipped over like a sin issue as opposed to a non unbelief issue.
Exactly. Yeah. And I mean that's the only reason why he would like not even want to have any. We were best friends. So that's, he was probably given specific. I've even heard of people who I've later talked to said like, "Hey, on my way out or whatever, when I had my meeting with the elders, they specifically said, 'Hey, one of your tests is going to be, this guy reaching out to you because I know how close you were.'" I'm sure my brother got that. I'm sure he got that on his way out. Like, "Hey, don't use that as an excuse to be talking to your apostate brother. Like, try to make your way back. I'm positive, so yeah.
Hmm. Well, I know, we're here just to hear your story and you're kind of telling it matter of fact, but I think I'm speaking for our audience and saying, just man, we're so sorry for you. I mean, we feel so wounded for, just that's an awful burden to bear, especially with, like you said, with your son involved now and that desire to have, the generational connection. Kids seeing their parents and their grandparents and so forth, and aunts and uncles, and to not have that connection is just it's unthinkable. And yet it's your real life. And I'm broken for you, and I'm so sorry that it's happened. And I certainly wish good things. I won't say I'll pray for you, but I hope good things come in. I really do. I hope there's some kind of restitution that happens there and
Yeah.
resolution. Um, I, I know we're running short on time. I do want to ask as we wrap up, could you tell us a little bit more about how you are using your rap music to tell your story and maybe also to plug your new album?
Yeah, absolutely. So when I first started, when I left the Jehovah's Witnesses, I've always been into rap music, which is kind of another thing you're not really supposed to be listening to as Jehovah's Witness, but it's kind of on the bottom tier as I've been kind of talking about. So it's kind of like, it's taboo. You don't really talk about it, but there's some people who probably do whatever. So um, and I've always known, like from a young age, I've had an ability just naturally, I was able to rap. I talk about in my mini documentary, I say that I remember being in health class and we're talking about, why you shouldn't smoke cigarettes. And I literally rapped the presentation about lung cancer and blah, blah, blah. It just was natural for me. I was
Awesome.
always thinking in rhymes, like it was crazy, and wordplay and stuff. So um, obviously, I didn't pursue that because I was a Jehovah's Witness, right? Well, now what's my reason not to? I'm not a Jehovah's Witness anymore, and I'm still really good at this, I think. So, I just decided to start doing it. And what I've always appreciated about rap music, even if it wasn't something that I could always um, identify with per se, because I'm not from a certain lifestyle, that's not my background. I was raised as a Jehovah's Witness, so there's a lot of things that rappers are talking about that I'm like, that's not how I grew up. But what I always appreciated is people's authenticity. So whatever your story is, I appreciate you telling that story and being authentic to whatever that is. And so it was kind of natural for me. It wasn't my intention to be like, I'm gonna be the ex Jehovah's Witness activist rapper. That wasn't it. It was more like I'm gonna be a rapper. This happens to be my story. And so I'm gonna tell it. And so I came out with my first song called Cost of Doing Business, which a lot of people will tell you is kind of the anthem for for leaving this specific religion because it's very direct and explicitly about that experience, and I use the word witness in it and stuff like it's unmistakable what I'm talking about. And the reaction, the response was so overwhelmingly favorable. Stephen Hassan, who's now a friend of mine, who's one of the leading cult experts in the world, published and everything. He found my video, and if you look at one of the top comments on that video, it's him, and he's saying, "I cried, when I watched this." And shout out to Stephen Hassan. He's been doing great work for years. And these other different songs that I had that people, even when I stopped using terms like witness or whatever, people knowing my background, they kind of know what I'm talking about. And then people who haven't been in that background, is a lot of it is just a human experience, right? You're dealing with cognitive dissonance. You're dealing with just trying to live an authentic life and be true, be honest with yourself and not lie to yourself and things like that, depression and all that. Like I touch on all of that kind of stuff, in the music. So I'm now that's kind of what I'm looked at, I think, is the ex Jehovah's Witness rapper, which, I mentioned in the mini documentary. At this point, I'm fine with that. That's my background. It is what it is. And I'm glad that people are able to gravitate to my lyrics and that it resonates with people. So that's kind of how that happened. That being said, I think I'm a talented rapper just in general. So I like to think that my music, and people have told me this before, it's something that just, if you appreciate lyricism, you appreciate storytelling and wordplay and all of that kind of stuff, like that's what my music is about. And I think it's generally, uplifting. It's generally very just, you feel seen. It's not stuff that a lot of people are talking about. The type of emotions and honesty and vulnerability, that is in a lot of my music, I think is something that a lot of people can relate to from a lot of different walks of life.
Hmm. I love it. I know when I was a Christian, we would have talked about using your talents for the Lord and sanctifying them for eternal purposes. But
Yeah.
it's so cool to see. This is in your lifeblood of like you're a musician and you're a poet and an artist, and you're just using it to help people to escape and hopefully to heal. I love it. By the way, do you happen to have a CD right there you could hold up? If you don't,
So I don't have it. So actually, let me show you this here. This is an enlarged, just poster size of my album cover. It's
nice,
called Terrible Twos. The first album was called 1 Years Old, and that was about starting life, essentially starting life over. And it's kind of the way a child would say that, right? A little kid would say, "Oh, he's 1 years old." So I kind of was playing off of that. And then, so this second one, Terrible Twos, the idea is this is like the next step in my evolution, right? I'm not quite as wide-eyed. I'm still learning things, right? But you're seeing a little bit more of my personality. You're seeing a little bit that I have a little bit of better of an understanding of things. And my son in this picture, and while I was composing this, he was two. So
mm,
I was seeing what the Terrible Twos was and why it was called that. And I kind of jokingly say now he's three. So I don't know if it's okay to say somebody's in their terrible threes, but if that's the case, he's still doing a lot of that same stuff. But it's been a beautiful experience to watch him grow. But so it's kind of a nod to both of those things. So it's on my website is officialfifthmusic.com. No crazy characters or spelling, all just regular spelling, Official Fifth Music. And
awesome.
I have this album on there that I'm featuring. And the way that I've set it up is a proud to pay campaign, which basically means, if you put something on these streaming platforms, it takes thousands of streams to get, I forgot exactly what the calculation is, but it's pennies that you get for a substantial amount of streams. So it's not, unless you're a huge artist, you really can't, even get a return on investment on, doing it that way. So I wanted to give people the opportunity to be able to just pay whatever they thought it was worth, and I thought that was a better way to gauge what my value is to others as an artist. And
Mm,
thankfully it's been very successful so far. It's just been out for at the time of this taping. It's just been out for a couple of days, and people are really enthusiastic and responding very well to it. So if you go to Official Fifth Music and you click support here, and it'll take you to where you can purchase the album, and you can put in whatever price you want. and then use whatever form of payment that you want, and then you will receive an email with the album downloaded, and then you can play it on whatever it is that you like. So
Hmm.
that's how I'm doing that. Additionally, I have a mini documentary that a production film company named Brand New Films has taken an interest in my story. And so there's a mini documentary called Taking Chances, and that's on my YouTube channel. You can just type in Fifth Taking Chances, or you can go to official Fifth Music, and it's underneath where you would buy the album. It's embedded in the on the website as well. So
Awesome.
encouraging people to check that out. The you know di- director of the film, the creator of the film is of the documentary is he's just curious. He doesn't have a background in the Jehovah's Witnesses or anything like that, but he's curious to just kind of see what the appetite for this type of story is. So I'm definitely asking people to just check it out. It's 14 minutes. I think it's interesting, and just kind of give you a glimpse into everything that kind of makes up who I am and where I am in life.
Hmm. I love it. That's awesome. And I'll include all the links that you mentioned beneath our video. So if anyone wants to just click on them, just look beneath our video, they'll all be there. And definitely, please, support Fifth's great efforts. Put in that little box that says how much you're giving. No less than $300 a pop, please. And but last question for you before you go. What's next? What's down the line? What should we expect from you in your we'll call them your terrific threes and your fantastic fours. What's coming next?
It's funny you say that because I was actually just trying to figure out what would be the next thing after there's 1 years old and terrible twos. What's the three thing? I'm still working on that. But anyway, but yeah, I'm already working on new music. I'm constantly writing and composing. So what's next? Um, like I said, this album just came out, so I want to continue to push that. I want people to hear it. I would love for a wider audience to be able to experience my music. Um, and doing shows. When I released my first project, 1 years old, it was in April. It was the release date was April of 2020, and we all know what happened in March of 2020, right? So I couldn't do anything because we weren't even with masks at that time. We were just stay in your house kind of thing. So, that kind of threw that off. So now I have the opportunity to kind of go and maybe do some tours and stuff like that. I'm still kind of analyzing the data to see where I might be able to go and things of that nature. And then yeah, more music. My goal is to just put out another project in the future and just continue to put it out there.
Awesome. Well, I hope one of your concerts is in Atlanta, Georgia. If you ever come this way, you got a free place to stay for sure. So
Appreciate it.
awesome.
Thank you
Well,
very much.
I really appreciate your time, Fifth. Great to hear your story. I know there's a lot more. Maybe we could do a follow up at some point down the line,
Sure.
especially with more of your work. But just I'd love to pick your brain more about some of the experiences that people who are in and escaping the JW cult go through. But it's just great to hear your story. Again, I'm very sorry for the losses. I understand some of mine have been a little bit different, but enough that I can understand some of them and certainly have some empathy and sympathy. But it sucks. I mean, that it really sucks. So I'm certainly hoping for good things for you. But I appreciate you being willing to speak up because there's a lot of people that, like you said, some people just have to keep quiet if they want to see their families. They want to, keep the peace. Some people do have a need for the time being to keep quiet. But
Hmm.
for those who are able to and willing to speak up, it makes a big difference. It means a lot to me personally because I'm obviously, doing the same thing. And for us to be able to develop a community where we can hear each other and, bounce ideas off each other, but also just hear the commonalities and the pain and say, yeah, I'm going through that too. It helps, normalize it a little bit. And also just the normalization of that dynamic you talked about where you're saying like, I finally, when I was disfellowship, like I stood back and said, like, what was I in? Like, this doesn't make sense anymore. And to have other people say, yeah, this doesn't make sense. And once, like we all keep saying, once you see it, you can't really unsee it. You're just like, this isn't reality.
Yeah.
But I appreciate it. I even got a nasty email from a Christian this morning, to be honest, before our before our interview. Like he didn't know. He's a guy
Okay.
I used to know for years. And
Mm.
I guess he thought he was still a Christian. He didn't know I've been out for a few years, but he apparently found out and sent me a nastygram. Like, what the hell? What are you doing? I thought you were going to honor God with your life. So like there's this all this painful stuff that comes up, and to
Yeah.
have people like you telling your story and your music, especially, I'm kind of jealous of that, your musical ability. It makes
Mm.
a big difference to us, and it just kind of helps us a lot, even just listening to it passively, like just the healing. There's a lot of, religious trauma that we've experienced. And, we need that healing process. So thank you for being a part of that. I really do appreciate it.
No problem. It's really been, one of the greatest experiences of my life to, put out art. I think that's something as an artist that artists crave is people, the music, the art resonating with people and people being able to see themselves in that art, and really be able to, absorb it in that way or receive it rather in that way. So yeah, it's been great, and I hope to continue to do it.
Awesome. Awesome. Well, everyone, we've been speaking with Fifth. Please, again, like and subscribe and check out all the links beneath our video. Fifth, great to hear your voice in this. Great to get to know you. I look forward to the next time, and thank you so much. Thank you for your story.
Likewise. Thanks a lot, Tim.
Thank you.